Montana Territory, December 1879. The snow comes sideways off the mountains and the road north disappears into dark. A woman is walking, alone, no lamp, no coat that was hers to begin with. She stops. She opens the bag against her chest and checks something inside. Small glass bottles, 1, 2, 3, 4, still intact. Behind her, 8 miles south, a town is deciding what to believe. A baby died that morning. They have already chosen who to blame. She closes the bag. She keeps walking. The cold has patience. She does not. She walks until she can no longer walk, and then the forest goes quiet, and something moves through the dark. 4 feet, not 2, coming toward her. The stagecoach stopped at the edge of Redfall at 4:15 in the afternoon, just as the light was giving up. Not stopping for the town, stopping because the driver had decided the snow past the creek crossing was not the kind of snow a reasonable man drove through for anyone else's schedule. He said so without apology, said it to the air in front of him rather than to her, which she had come to understand was how men in the frontier territories delivered decisions they had no interest in debating. Marion Lane climbed down with her satchel and her carpet bag and the letter she had read so many times. The paper had gone soft along the fold lines. She looked at the town. Redfall in December was exactly what she had expected, and somehow still more than that. A main street of low buildings pressed against the cold like they were leaning on each other for warmth. A livery stable with one lamp swinging in the wind, a general store with a light in the window, a church with a weather vane that could not make up its mind about the direction of things, the mountains behind everything enormous and indifferent, doing what Montana mountains did in December, which was make the sky feel smaller and the cold feel personal. She thought 8 miles north is the Brecken Ranch. She thought you are not there yet. She thought one night, stay one night, then tomorrow someone from the ranch will come for you. That was the arrangement. That was what the letter said. She put the letter in her coat pocket, where it had been living for 22 days. She picked up her bags and walked toward the boarding house. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Harker, who had the efficiency of someone who had been answering the same questions for so long. She gave the information before you finish asking. 2 nights $1, 1 night 60 cents, bath 15 cents extra, and you wait until morning. Supper at 6, no late service. She looked at Marin's bags once and did not ask where she was going. Some things were obvious. The room at the back was small and clean and cold. Heat was a courtesy, here not a promise. Marin set down her bags and opened her satchel. Checked the contents the way she checked them every night of the journey. Small glass bottles with stoppered tops, dried herbs in labeled cloth pouches, a notebook with handwriting that got progressively smaller as the pages filled, a penknife, clean cloth for bandaging, and the letter. She unfolded it the way you unfolded something that had become a habit. Not to read. She had it memorized. She unfolded it because the paper was something physical to hold, and she was 29 years old, in a room she had never seen, in a town she did not know yet, 8 miles from a man she had never met. Colt Brecken had written in a plain hand, no flourishes, no decoration. The sentences were short and honest in the way of a man who had learned that extra words usually complicated things rather than clarified them. He had written, I have a ranch north of Redfall. I work timber with my brothers. I am not looking for decoration. I am looking for someone who wants a life that is real, not easy. I will work alongside whoever comes. I will not make promises I cannot keep. If this interests you, write back. She had written back. They had exchanged 4 letters over 3 months. Each one had gotten slightly less formal. Each one had gotten slightly more specific about the people they actually were beneath the polite language of strangers. His second letter had asked about Vermont. She had told him about the cold there, which was different from Western cold, and about what she grew in the kitchen garden, and what she had learned to grow after the hard winters. He had written back about the timber camp and about how the mountains here did not care what you thought of them, which she had liked. His fourth letter said, "I think you are braver than you believe yourself to be. I think coming here will prove it." Then he had included a piece of waxed cord from the timber yard with a note that said, "Good cord. My mother used to say you could judge a person by what they used to hold things together." The original clasp on her satchel had broken on the journey. She had used the cord to fix it. She folded the letter back, tucked it into her coat pocket. She lay down on the narrow bed and listened to the wind outside pressing against the walls of the boarding house, testing them the way winter tested everything here. She thought tomorrow morning. She thought 8 miles. She thought one night. She closed her eyes. She was not asleep when the crying started. It came through the wall. A child, not the ordinary nighttime sound of someone woken from a dream, the particular pitch of real pain, sustained, without rhythm, the kind of crying that did not stop because the thing causing it did not stop. Maren knew that pitch. She had known it since the winter she was 14 years old. She sat up in the dark. She thought, "It is not your town." She thought, "You don't know these people." She thought, "You have been traveling for 3 weeks. Tomorrow morning someone is coming. Sleep." She thought the crying has not stopped. She got up. She dressed in the dark. She picked up her satchel. She stepped out into the hallway and knocked on the wall between her room and the next, then moved toward the sound. Mrs. Harker appeared with a lamp from the other direction, like she had been expecting someone to come out. "The Neff baby," she said. No preamble. "Third child this week." Maren stopped. Third with the same fever. Started 4 days ago. South end of town. Nobody has an answer. Mrs. Harker's mouth pressed tight. "The pastor said it was judgment. The doctor left for Helena 3 weeks ago for his sister's wedding. Nobody knows when he's coming back." Maren looked at her satchel. "I have some training," she said. "May I look?" Mrs. Harker considered her with the expression of a woman who was measuring something. "It's across the yard," she said finally. "I'll take you." The Neff baby was 18 months old and burning, not the gradual warmth of an ordinary fever coming up slowly over a day. This was the kind that arrived all at once and did not negotiate. The mother, a young woman named Clara Neff, whose eyes had not closed in days, sat in a rocker with the baby held against her chest and rocked with the mechanical repetition of someone who had lost track of what they were doing and was just moving to keep moving. Maren set her satchel down beside the hearth. She examined the baby the way her teacher had taught her. Start with what you can see, move to what you can feel, then what you can smell. There was an order to it, and the order mattered because the order was designed to keep you from jumping to conclusions before you had all the information. She followed the order, and then she smelled something. Not sickness. Underneath the sickness, faint, something chemical that did not belong in the air of a home. The kind of thing that only registered when you had been trained to look for things that did not belong, when you had spent years cataloging what was normal so that the abnormal became visible rather than background. She stood up slowly. She went to the window. Outside, moonlight on snow and the dark shape of the well in the side yard. "Which well do you draw from?" she said. Clara Neff looked up from her baby for the first time. "The south well, same as always." "Why? How long have the other families been using it?" "Same one I use. Everyone on this end of the street uses the south well. The north well froze 2 years ago, and nobody bothered to." She stopped. "Why are you asking about the well?" Maren thought about the 4 days, the south end of town, third child, the thing underneath the smell of sickness. "May I take a sample of your water?" she said, gently, not a demand, a question with room to say no. "Clara?" Neff stared at her. "What kind of sample?" "From the bucket, just a small bottle. I want to look at it." There was a hesitation in Clara Neff's face. Not suspicion exactly, more like the exhaustion of a woman who had been awake for days and did not have capacity for things she did not understand. "All right," she said, "if it helps." There were 12 small glass bottles in Marin's satchel. Her teacher had given them to her on the day she left Vermont, with one instruction: take samples before you take conclusions. Evidence first, opinion second. She filled one bottle from the water bucket. She labeled it with the date and the address. She put it in her satchel. She worked on the baby until past midnight. She could not cure what she had not yet identified, but she could bring the fever down enough for the child to sleep for a few hours. She could make Clara Neff sit down and drink something warm and eat half a piece of bread before the woman's hands stopped shaking enough to hold a cup. She went to 2 other houses before dawn. She took 3 more samples. By the time the sky began lightening, she had visited 5 families and had 4 bottles labeled in her satchel and 4 pages of notes in her notebook. 4 households on the south end, all using the same well. She sat at the small table in her room and looked at what she had written. She thought, "This is not a disease I recognize." She thought the progression is wrong for influenza, wrong for typhoid, wrong for cholera, slower, more consistent across households than a contagion would be. The smell, the way it clustered precisely to households sharing a water source. She wrote in her notebook, not contagion, possibly contamination, consistent with something introduced through shared water. Need analysis of samples, need to know what is upstream of the south well. She looked at that last line for a long time. She thought you know what you need to do. She thought you know what that is going to look like to people who don't know you. She thought a baby is sick. She went to find the pastor. The pastor was a thin man with a careful voice who listened to everything she said and then said he would pray on it, which was not nothing, but it was also not what she needed. She asked if there was anyone on the town council she could speak with, someone with authority to stop people using the south well until the water could be tested. The pastor said, "That would be Mr. Vane." He said it with a quality she could not name exactly, not warning, more like a man saying the name of weather. She said, "Can you tell me where to find him?" She found Wendell Vane at his house on the north end of Main Street, which was the largest house on the street by a margin. He received her in the front parlor with coffee already prepared, which meant he had been told she was coming before she arrived. He was a large man, silver at his temples, the stillness of someone accustomed to being the most important person in the room, who was very good at making that feel like generosity rather than power. He had the practiced ease of a man who had learned that people trusted you if you never appeared to want anything from them. He listened to everything she said about the water, about the samples, about the clustering of sick children along the south end, about the smell she had noticed that did not match any communicable illness she had trained for. He listened with excellent attention and then said, "That's a very interesting theory, Miss Lane," not frightening her, not dismissing her, just applying the word theory the way you applied a lid to something you did not want to let out. She looked at him. She thought he is not confused by what I'm telling him. She thought a man who was hearing this for the first time would have questions, would want to see the samples, would want to understand. She thought he already understands. She said, "I'd like to show the samples to someone with more resources than I have, a chemist, if there is one, or someone connected to a university. The analysis would take time, but the result—" "I appreciate your concern," Vane said. He set his coffee cup down with the particular care of a man ending a conversation. "Truly, you've had a long journey. Get some rest. I'm sure the Brecken boys will be here tomorrow, and you'll want to be rested." She walked back to the boarding house. She thought he knows the Breckens. She thought, of course he does. Small territory. Everyone knows everyone. She thought the samples are in the satchel. Keep them there. She kept them there. The Neff baby died at noon. She was there when it happened. She had not been able to stay away after 8 in the morning. She had told herself she was going back just to check, just to see how the night had gone, and she had sat with Clara Neff in the weak winter light and held the baby while Clara slept in the chair for 1 hour, and then she had handed the baby back when Clara woke and sat across the room and watched. There was a particular moment. She had seen it before, the way breathing changed, the way a body made its final decision. Clara Neff made a sound when it happened, not a scream, smaller than a scream and somehow wider, the kind of sound that had no good response. Marin stayed in her chair. She did not say anything because there was nothing to say. Sometimes staying in a room was the only remaining useful thing. She had learned that at 14. She had spent the years since then wishing she had known it earlier. The door opened 20 minutes later. 3 men she did not know came in. Then Wendell Vane. "Miss Lane," Vane said. His voice was very quiet, the way quiet could be louder than speaking normally. "I think it would be best if you came with us." She stood slowly. Behind Vane, one of the men said, "She was here last night. She had bottles. She took things." "I took water samples," Marin said. Her voice was level. She was very good at level. "I took them because the pattern of illness in this town is consistent with water contamination, not contagion. 4 families, all using the same well. I took the samples to document that pattern." The room received this information and set it aside. "She admitted it," a second man said. "I admitted nothing of the kind." She looked at each face in the room, not Vane, the others, the ones who might still be listening with something other than fear. "Every child who is sick lives on the south end of this street. Every one of them draws from the south well. I have 4 samples that may tell us what is wrong with that water. That is documentation. That is how you find out what is actually causing this." Nobody spoke. She thought they are not hearing the word contamination. They are only hearing the word took. Vane stepped toward her. Not fast. No hurry. "You arrived yesterday," he said, still very quiet, the kind of quiet meant to sound like reason. "You have no history in this town, no family here, no connections here. You arrived the same night the sickness moved from the other households to the Neff family." He paused. "A baby died this morning." She looked at him, and in that moment she saw it clearly. Not confusion, not fear, not the genuine grief of a man responding to a child's death. She saw something much simpler and much colder calculation. He was not looking for truth. He was looking for a direction, and she was in the direction he had already chosen. She thought he knows about the water. She thought he has known, and he chose not to act. She thought, say it. She looked at him and she said, "The water from the south well is contaminated by something upstream of this town. I don't know what yet, but you are going to lose more children if you keep using it. And I believe you know something about what is upstream. And I believe that is why you are standing in this room right now." The air changed. She felt it change the way you felt a door open in a warm room. Vane looked at her for a long moment. "Leave Redfall tonight," he said, "before the road closes. If I leave, those samples go with me." "Yes," he said. "They do." She understood then what he was actually saying. He was not frightened of her telling the town. He had already controlled that. He was frightened of the bottles, of what was in the bottles, of where those bottles might end up if she reached someone with the equipment and the authority to read them. She picked up her satchel. She walked to the door. She stopped. She looked back at Clara Neff, who had not moved, who was still sitting with her baby, and had not heard anything that had been said in the room behind her. Marin wanted to say something. She opened her mouth. She closed it. There were no words that were the right size for what had happened in that room. She had learned that too. Some grief did not want language. It wanted presence, and she could not stay to provide that. She walked out. She packed in 6 minutes. She did not panic. Panic was a waste of energy she could not afford. She had a list of priorities that had arranged themselves automatically satchel first. Everything in the satchel checked and secured. Then the carpet bag with what she needed for 2 days. Everything else was material. She left 60 cents on the table for Mrs. Harker. She left through the kitchen door. She walked north because north was the direction of the ranch and north was the only plan she had. The snow started properly 20 minutes after she left Redfall. Not the gentle kind, the kind that had mass to it, the kind that moved horizontally for stretches and then turned and came from another direction entirely as if it could not decide on its approach. She knew the ranch was 8 miles north. She did not know the road precisely. She had a lamp she had taken from the boarding house kitchen that had enough oil for perhaps an hour. She thought, keep the mountains on your left. She thought, you have done harder things before. She thought, have you? She walked. The cold came in stages. First the extremities, fingers and toes, then the face, then the parts of her body that she had thought were protected by her coat, the cold finding its way through the seams and the gaps with a patience that felt almost methodical, like something that knew it had time and was in no hurry. She stopped twice to check the bottles in her satchel, making sure the stoppers were holding, making sure the glass had not cracked in the cold. Intact, both times. She thought, if the samples survive, this means something. She thought, keep walking. The lamp went out somewhere past the 2nd hour. She had been rationing it, lighting it only when the road became unclear, which happened more and more as the snow accumulated on the trail. When it went out, she shook it once. Nothing. She set it down by the side of the road. She kept walking until she could not. She found the fallen tree by almost walking into it, a large pine down long enough that its roots had dried to a gray tangle reaching upward. The hollow beneath the root mass was not warm, but it was out of the wind, which was the closest thing to warmth available. She pulled herself into it. She checked the satchel one more time, ran her fingers over each bottle, each stopper, each label she had written in pencil. Intact. She thought good. She thought about her family, not with the clean grief of someone who had processed a thing and put it somewhere it could be carried, with the immediate quality of memory that came when the body was cold and the mind had nothing else to hold on to. Her father first. The winter she was 14, then her mother, then Lily, who had been 9 years old and the loudest person in any room she occupied, who had been afraid of almost nothing, who had not been afraid even at the end, which was the thing Marin had never stopped thinking about. She had tried everything she knew at 14, everything her neighbor knew, everything the doctor in the next town had said could be done, which was not much. She had stood there with her knowledge, which was not enough, and she had watched 3 people leave the world in 41 days. She had spent the next 15 years making sure the knowledge would be enough next time. She thought, I knew something was wrong with the water. She thought I said it. She thought I said it and they chose not to hear it. She thought the bottles. She thought, if the bottles survive, if the bottles reach someone, then it mattered that you said it. Then it was not nothing. She tightened her arms around the satchel. She told herself she would not sleep. She knew what sleeping in this cold meant. She had been trained to know, but exhaustion had the same patience as the cold, and somewhere between one thought and the next, she stopped having them. She heard him before she was fully awake. Not footsteps, not the kind of sound a human made moving through snow, something lower to the ground. 4 points of contact instead of 2, moving with purpose and without hesitation, the sound of something that knew exactly where it was going. She opened her eyes. There was a dog, medium-sized, gray and brown, the coloring of something that lived in mountains and knew how to disappear into them when necessary. He stood at the edge of the hollow beneath the roots and looked at her with the calm, deliberate attention of an animal that had found what it was looking for and was now waiting for the situation to develop. She thought that dog belongs to someone. She thought dogs that move like that with that confidence in terrain at night they are trained. They have a person, she thought, or they had one. "Hello," she said. Her voice was rougher than she expected, frost in it. The dog stepped forward. He sniffed her face. He sniffed the satchel with the interest of an animal that had been given a task and was confirming completion. He sat down. He looked at her. He looked back the way he had come. He looked at her again. "Is that a direction?" she said. The dog stood up. She understood. She tried to stand. Her legs had opinions about this. They were not wrong opinions. She overruled them anyway. She got to her feet. The dog was already moving at the pace of something that had decided she could keep up and was giving her the chance to prove it. She followed. 50 yards, perhaps 100. The cold moved with her, but the dog moved steadily ahead, and she kept her eyes on the shape of him in the dark, the gray-brown shape between the trees, and she did not think about anything except keeping that shape in sight. She heard the footsteps before she saw the lamp. Heavy, deliberate. A person who knew this ground by the weight of it under their feet. Then the lamp. A man walking through the pines with a lamp held up. He stopped when the dog came out of the trees toward him. "Flint," he said, low, the word between a command and a question. The dog went back into the trees, came back out, went back in. The man raised the lamp. He walked into the trees. The light reached her before he did. She could see him clearly then, large in the way of years of timber work rather than any particular cultivation of it. Dark coat, hat with snow collected on the brim, a face that the outdoors had been working on for a long time, eyes that found her and moved through several things quickly. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the satchel. And she watched something happen in his expression, not recognition of her face. He had never seen her face, but he was looking at the satchel, at the worn leather, at the repair on the clasp, at the piece of waxed cord holding it closed. His jaw moved. He had sent that cord 3 months ago. In his 4th letter, she watched him understand what the cord meant here, what it meant that she had used it, what it meant that she was here with it in the trees. "Marin Lane," he said, not a question. "Colt Brecken," she said. He stood very still for a moment. Then he took off his coat. He put it around her shoulders with the efficiency of someone who had assessed the situation and identified the immediate priority. The coat was warm with him in it, and she did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and she was too cold to say it anyway. He crouched down to look at Flint. "You found her," he said, quiet, to the dog, like confirming something. Flint's tail moved once. Colt stood. He looked at her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Good. Walk. You can tell me the rest when we get there." She held the satchel against her body with both arms. She thought the samples. She thought still intact. She thought there is still time. She walked. Flint moved alongside her, not ahead now, beside, one step, then another. The dog had found what he was looking for and had decided that finding was only the first part of the job. The staying beside was the second. The lamp moved through the trees in front of them. The mountains were enormous and dark and did not care, but the lamp was there and she followed it, and that was for now entirely enough. The ranch appeared through the trees at something past midnight, not the way she had imagined it on the journey. She had read his letter so many times. She had assembled a version of it in her mind that was cleaner than the truth as imagined things always were. The real ranch was lower and longer than she had pictured, heavy with snow on the roof, 2 outbuildings behind the main house connected by a covered walkway someone had built with the pragmatism of a person who had once crossed from barn to house in bad weather without it and had decided never to do that again. A light was on in the kitchen. Colt opened the door without knocking, which was how you opened a door to your own house, but she noticed it because she had been knocking on doors her whole life. Two men were at the kitchen table. One was in his late 20s, lighter in the face. He had been reading and was still holding the book when he looked up. His expression moved through surprise and landed on something that looked like the beginning of relief, like he had been waiting for something to resolve and was glad it was resolving in this particular direction. The other was older, broader. He looked at Marin the way a man looked at a door that had opened without warning, assessing before responding. She was in the trees past the North Fork, Colt said. Flint found her. The younger one put down his book. He was already standing, already moving toward the fire, already putting another log on without being asked. How long was she out there? I don't know, Colt said. He looked at her. How long? 3 nights, she said. I think 3. The room did something quiet for a moment. The younger one said, I'm Dax. Like it was obvious she needed to know that immediately, and there was no point waiting. Marin, she said. Sit down, Dax said. Here, by the fire, right now. She sat. The older one was still at the table, still looking at her, not with cruelty, with the careful attention of someone who had learned that the cost of trusting the wrong person was particular and lasting, and not something you recovered from quickly. Rafe, he said, just the name, no offer beyond it. Hello, she said. He nodded once. Flint came in and settled himself across the threshold between the kitchen and the main room, close enough to the fire to feel it, close enough to the door to be useful. Dax made something hot. She did not ask what it was. When he set it in front of her, she drank it without analyzing the flavor, which was something she could not normally do. Every cup of something she tasted the way a person who had spent years thinking about what things were made of tasted them. She could not stop it, but she was too cold for it tonight. She just drank. The warmth came back in stages, not all at once, in sections. The hands first, then the face, then the parts of her that had gone past cold into the blankness that her teacher had told her was the warning signal. She thought you are going to be all right. She thought the samples are still in the satchel. She thought stop thinking about the samples for 5 minutes. She could not stop. She slept in a room at the back of the house that had been made up with clean bedding and a quilt that smelled of cedar and a lamp turned low on the table. She slept longer than she intended to. She woke with the light already past the window and the sound of someone working in the yard below. She lay still for a moment. She thought you are at the Brecken Ranch. She thought you came here to marry a man you know from 4 letters. She thought, and instead of that you spent 3 nights in the trees, and you have 4 bottles of evidence in your satchel that a town's worth of people do not want to exist. She thought that is a meaningful difference from the plan. She got up. She found the kitchen empty, but the coffee still hot, which was a kind of message. She poured a cup and sat at the table and opened her notebook to the pages she had written in red fall. She read them again. 4 households. South well. Symptoms inconsistent with communicable disease. Clustering too precise. Onset too similar across separate households with no documented contact. She turned to a new page and wrote, Question. What is upstream of the South well in Redfall? She wrote mining activity noted in hills north of town per stagecoach driver who mentioned it in passing. She underlined mining. She put a mark beside it. She heard the door. Dax came in with snow on his coat and the expression of someone who had been waiting for the house to produce a person and was pleased it had finally done so. You're up, he said. I'm up. Good. We weren't sure when you'd be ready. He poured his own coffee and sat across from her with the ease of someone who was comfortable in kitchens and with people simultaneously, which was rarer than it sounded. Colt told us some of what happened in town, not all of it. What did he tell you? That you tried to help and they decided that was suspicious. He said it without heat, like he was describing weather. That Vane was involved. She looked up. You know him. Everyone in this valley knows Vane. Something crossed Dax's face, not quite a smile, more like the memory of a decision he had already made about someone. He's the kind of man who's helpful in a way that leaves you owing him something, and he keeps very precise track of what you owe. She looked at her notebook. "What are you writing?" Dax asked. "Questions," she said. "Things I need to find out." He leaned forward slightly to look at the page. He did not read it. He just looked at the fact that she was writing in it. "Colt writes like that," he said. "Lists when he's working through something." She thought 4 letters, and in all 4 of them the sentences were short and organized, the kind of sentences that came from a mind that thought in sequences, that mapped things out before moving, that was careful. She did not say this. "Is he outside?" she said instead. "North pasture. He'll be back by noon." She looked at the window. Snow had stopped. The sky was the particular winter white that was not clouds but just sky deciding to be that color for a while. "I need him to see the samples," she said, "and what I've written. Someone needs to understand what I found before Vane finds another way to make this go away." Dax looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. "He'll be back by noon." Rafe she found in the barn. She had not gone looking for him. She went to check on the horses because she needed something physical to do, and horses required attention rather than thought, and she had too many thoughts at the moment. He was working on something with the harness. He did not look up when she came in. She did not pretend he had not noticed her. That kind of pretending made things worse. "I'm not trying to cause trouble for your family," she said. He kept working. "I know how this looks," she said. "I arrived the night children started dying. I'm a stranger. I have no reason to be trusted." He looked up then. "I'm not interested in what it looks like," he said. "I'm interested in what it is." He set the harness down. "What Colt told us, is that what happened?" "Yes." "You collected samples before they drove you out?" "Yes." "And you think it's the water?" "I think it's something in the water. I don't know what. I need someone who can analyze them. A chemist, a doctor with more equipment than I have." She looked at him directly. "I know you don't know me. I know I came here in a way that looks like nothing good. But I need those samples to reach someone who can read them. And I need someone in this valley to understand why that matters before Vane makes another move." Rafe looked at her for a long moment. He had the way of looking at things that she associated with men who had been disappointed by particular people and had responded by being thorough instead of bitter. "I'll think about it," he said, which was not yes, but it was not no either. She went back to the house. The days at the ranch were not what she had planned, and also, in small ways, more than she had planned. She helped in the kitchen because she was good at it, and because it gave her hands something to do while her mind worked. She helped Dax with the wood because her body needed to move, and movement helped her think. She sat at the kitchen table in the evenings with her notebook and her bottles and her lists, and she watched the 3 brothers move around each other with the practiced ease of people who had been sharing space long enough that they had developed an entire unspoken language about it. Colt split logs in the morning. Rafe managed the equipment with a patience she came to understand was characteristic. Dax talked to everything and everyone, including the horses and Flint, and once a particularly stubborn piece of timber that refused to lie flat and needed to be informed of its options. She found herself watching Colt, not in the way she had expected to watch a man she had traveled 22 days to meet. She had expected that watching to feel large and significant and self-conscious. It felt instead like watching something that was just there, present, doing exactly what it was doing without performing any of it. He chopped wood with the economy of someone who had been doing it long enough that the motion was automatic. He checked on Flint at the end of each day before he checked on anything else. He came back from the north pasture with snow on his coat and mud on his boots and went directly to the kitchen and made coffee without saying anything to anyone, and that too was a kind of communication that she had come to understand. He had not said much directly to her since the night he brought her in. until he did. It was the third evening. She was on the porch because the kitchen had gotten warm in the way that sometimes made her feel like the walls were close, and she needed the cold of outdoor air just for a moment, just to clear her head. She heard the door. Colt came out with 2 cups. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. She took it. They stood for a while in the quiet of a night that was not uncomfortable. Mountains in the distance doing what mountains did at night, which was mostly being very large and very permanent about things. He said, "My mother used plants." She did not say anything. She waited. She knew which ones helped and which ones hurt. He said, she knew things the doctor in the nearest town didn't know. She learned them from her own mother and from years of paying attention to what grew where and when and why. He looked at the mountains. When I was 12, the pastor's son got sick. Fever. My mother went to help. She knew something for fevers. It had worked before many times. Silence. It didn't work this time, he said. The boy died 3 days later, and the town needed somewhere to put that. He was quiet for a moment. She had been too useful for too long for them to hate her during the good times, but during the bad times, when they needed somewhere to put their grief and their fear, Marin held her cup. They came at night, he said. I was in the house. Rafe was 16. He tried to stop them. They hit him until he couldn't. He stopped. She didn't run. She stood at the door and told them they were making a mistake. She kept telling them that. He looked at the night. She was right. It didn't help. Marin said, "How old was Dax?" 4. She said nothing. I placed that advertisement, he said, because I am 35 years old and I have been running a timber operation and raising 2 brothers in a valley where the nearest town is 8 miles away, and I have not. I have not been. I have been doing the work. He stopped, found the next thing, and because I read your letter back and I read it again and I thought she knows something about the way the world can turn on a person who was just trying to help, and I wanted to see if that kind of person could come here and stay. She looked at the mountains. She thought he is not asking you to marry him in that sentence. She thought he is asking you something larger than that. She thought he is asking whether a person who has been turned on by one place can choose a different place and mean it. She said, I'm 29 years old. I have been a healer since I was 14. I have been turned away from 3 towns and 1 county because what I know makes people uncomfortable when it doesn't work fast enough. She looked at her coffee. I am not surprised by what happened in Redfall. I am tired of it. Those are different things. He looked at her. Why did you start at 14? He said. She thought don't. She thought he just told you about his mother. She said, my family, my father first, then my mother, then my sister Lily, who was 9 years old. She stopped. I didn't know enough. I had never needed to know before. I stood there with nothing, and I watched 3 people leave. She looked at the mountains. So I made sure I would never stand there again. He was quiet for a long time. And you still stood there, he said, quietly, not unkindly, in Redfall. Yes, she said, but this time I had the samples. Something shifted in his face, very slightly. The shift of someone deciding to believe something they had not yet decided to believe. He did not say anything else, but he stayed on the porch until she went back inside, and that was its own kind of answer. Rafe found the ledger on the 4th day. She was at the kitchen table when he came in from the back of the house carrying it, not urgently, with the careful movement of someone handling something they were still thinking about. He set it on the table. She looked at it. I've had it since August, he said. He sat down across from her. A foreman from the Gaston operation comes through our timber yard twice a season to negotiate pricing on contracts. Last summer he came through drunk and left in a hurry and left this. He looked at the cover of the ledger. I put it in the back room meaning to return it. I never got around to returning it. She waited. I never read it, he said, until last night. He opened it to a marked page. Look at this column. She looked. Names and numbers arranged in rows, dates, monthly entries. There was a name she recognized. She thought, W. Vane. She thought, there it is. She looked at the column next to the name. Amounts. Regular. Monthly. Going back 14 months. She looked at the column on the other side. Descriptions. She had to read carefully because the handwriting was cramped and abbreviated, but the words she needed were there. Red Fall Creek Disposal Point, South Tributary, monthly authorization. She put her finger on those words. She looked at Rafe. He authorized the dumping, she said. They paid him to look the other way. Rafe's jaw was set. Yes. For 14 months. Yes. She thought about the children, the Southwell, the baby that died at noon. She thought about Vane standing in Clara Neff's house with his very quiet voice telling her she had made a convenient story. She thought 14 months. She thought how many children before the Neff baby. She thought how many before anyone noticed. We need to get this to someone, she said, outside the territory, the U.S. Marshal's office. If Vane has authority over the local council, there is no local authority that can touch this. Rafe looked at her. He said, I've been sitting on this since August. You didn't know, she said. No. He looked at the ledger. But I could have read it in August. I didn't. He stopped. That's a thing I'm going to have to think about. She understood what he was saying. He was not asking for absolution. He was naming a weight and deciding he would carry it correctly from here on. Then we start from where we are, she said. What do you know about reaching the U.S. Marshals? He looked up. More than you'd expect, he said. There's a deputy post at Garner's Crossing, 40 miles east, a day's hard ride. Not Helena, but they can wire Helena from there. She nodded. Then that's where the ledger goes. Yes, he said. It does. They were still at the table when the wagon appeared on the road. Flint heard it first. He lifted his head from the floor and looked at the door with the alert stillness of something that knew the difference between Colt's return and something else. This was something else. Marin saw it from the window. A wagon with 2 men and a driver, coming up the road with the unhurried certainty of people who had the right to be there and were not in any doubt about it. Wendell Vane stepped down from the wagon without looking at the ranch, the way most people looked at a place they had never been. He looked at it like he had already measured it. He was carrying a document. She thought legal papers. She thought he moved faster than I expected. She thought, of course, he moved fast. He needs those bottles. Colt came from the barn. He had seen the wagon. He walked to the front of the house and stood there, with his coat open and his arms at his sides, which was how he stood when he was thinking. Vane stopped at the edge of the yard. Mr. Brecken, he said. His voice carried well in the cold. I have a writ from the council authorizing me to take custody of one Marin Lane, pending investigation of her conduct during the illness event in Redfall last Monday. Marin stayed at the window. She thought writ, not a warrant, a writ from the town council. She thought he cannot have a proper arrest warrant, not without a magistrate, not in this territory. She watched Colt, and she saw it, just for a moment, a single moment. He was still, too still, the stillness of someone doing very rapid internal calculation, someone weighing one thing against another, someone who had learned at the age of 12 what happened when you stood between a crowd and what it wanted. She thought he's going to let Vane take me. She thought no. She thought maybe. She thought it's 1 second. It has only been 1 second. And then the second ended. Colt took 1 step forward. That's a council writ, he said, not a warrant. You need a warrant. I have the authority of the council. You have the authority of the Redfall Town Council, Colt said, which ends at the Redfall town boundary. This property is not in Redfall. He looked at the men in the wagon, then at Vane. You need a warrant from a territorial magistrate. Bring one and we'll have a conversation. Until then, get off my land. Vane looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the window. He could not see her there. The angle was wrong and the interior was too dark, but he looked at the window. the way you looked at something you knew was there, even if you could not see it. He said, I'll come back with the proper paperwork. Then I'll be here, Colt said. Vane got back in the wagon. The wagon left. Marin stepped back from the window. She thought 1 second. She thought it was only 1 second, and then he stepped forward. She thought that matters. She thought that matters more than you know. She did not think about that further. She went to the kitchen table and sat down and picked up her notebook and wrote, Timeline. Rafe to Garner's Crossing one day. Wire to Helena. Marshall response 1 additional day minimum. Vane will have legitimate paperwork before then. She underlined legitimate. She underlined before then. She thought there is something else. She thought what else? She went back to the window. She looked at the direction of Redfall. She thought about the family she had treated on the night the baby died. The older child, not the Neff baby. There had been an older child in one of the other houses, 6 years old, already showing early symptoms, the kind of early symptoms that looked like nothing for a few days and then did not. She thought if they keep drinking from the south well. She thought that child has been drinking from that well for 4 days since I left. She counted in her head. She thought 48 hours. She thought that child has approximately 48 hours before the window closes. She thought you are safe here. The ledger is here. The samples are here. Rafe is going to Garner's Crossing. She thought safe. She thought you know what safe costs right now. She stood at the window for a long time. She thought about Lily. She did not think about Lily often. She had spent 15 years converting the grief of Lily into the discipline of her training. That was a transformation she had made deliberately. Lily as fuel rather than wound. But now she thought about Lily. Lily, who was 9 years old and afraid of almost nothing. She thought if someone had come back that winter, if someone had come back to the house when we were 3 weeks into it, and they had known something, and they had chosen not to come because it was not safe, I would have understood. I was 14. I would have understood, and it would have been reasonable, and the world would have continued to be the same world it was. But Lily would still have been gone. She turned from the window. She walked to the kitchen doorway. Rafe was still at the table. He looked up. She said, How far is Redfall? He said, 8 miles. She said, I need to go back. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Vane has, Rafe started. Vane has paperwork that doesn't exist yet, she said. And there is a 6-year-old child in Redfall who has been drinking the same water as the Neff baby for 4 more days since I left. She picked up her notebook. I have the samples. I have the documentation. Vane cannot make those disappear if I am standing in the middle of the town with them. She looked at Rafe. He controlled the story when I was invisible. He cannot control it when I'm not. Rafe was quiet. She said, I know what this looks like. It looks like walking into a fire, he said. Yes, she said, but I know where the fire is, and I know what it's burning and why. She held his gaze. Take the ledger to Garner's Crossing today. Wire Helena from there. I'll go back to Redfall. She heard the door. Colt came in from the yard. He looked at her face. He looked at Rafe's face. He said, What happened? She said, There's a child in Redfall who is going to die if no one tells that family to stop using the Southwell. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at the window. He said, When do you want to leave? She thought he did not ask if she was sure. He did not ask if she had thought it through. He did not run through the list of reasons this was dangerous, which was the list she had already run through herself, and which she did not need someone else to read back to her. He just asked when. She said now. He picked up his coat. He said, Dax, saddle the horses. Rafe, you know what to do. Rafe was already standing. Dax appeared from somewhere in the back of the house and said nothing about the situation, but went directly to his coat and his boots, because he had apparently absorbed the essential information through the walls. Flint stood up. He looked at Marin. She looked at him. She thought you found her. She thought, I know. She thought, now you have to go back. She thought, I know that too. She picked up her satchel. She put her notebook in it. She put the 4 bottles in it with the care of someone checking them for the last time. She buckled it closed with the piece of wax cord. She thought, be careful. She thought, yes. She thought, but careful was never going to be the whole answer. She walked out to the horses. They rode into Redfall at noon. No ceremony to it. No announcement. Just 4 horses coming down the main street with their breath in the cold air and their riders sitting straight against the wind. Marin was in front because she had decided to be in front. Not because it was strategic, though it was. Not because it was symbolic, though it probably was that too. Because she had spent 3 days in the trees deciding whether she was the kind of person who could do this. And she had decided yes. And you did not put that kind of decision behind other people. You carried it at the front. Flint ran alongside. The town noticed them the way towns notice things, in stages. 1 person on the boardwalk who stopped, then 2, then the general store door opening, then heads turning on the south end of the street where most of the sick families lived. Marin did not look at the faces. She looked at the houses. She knew which one she needed. She had the address in her notebook, but she did not need the notebook. Some things you memorize, not because you tried to, but because they were important enough that your mind did it without being asked. 3rd house on the left past the dry goods store. The Aldrich family. A father named Martin. A mother whose name she had not learned. A 6-year-old boy she had examined on her last night in Redfall, and whose symptoms had been early enough that she had written in her notebook monitor closely. Stop using Southwell water immediately. She had told the mother that. She had no way of knowing if the mother had listened. She dismounted at the gate. She thought, just go in. She thought, knock first. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately. The mother, young, dark circles under her eyes that had not been there 6 days ago, or maybe they had been there and Marin had been too focused on the child to notice. You came back, the woman said, not accusation. Something much more complicated than accusation. I came back, Marin said. How is he? The woman stepped back from the door. Inside, the boy was in bed by the fire. He was 6 years old, and he looked smaller than 6. The smallness of a body that was using everything it had to fight something it did not understand. Marin set her satchel down. She thought, okay. She thought, you know what this is. You have known what this is since the Southwell. She thought then, do what you know. She worked. She had brought what she needed from the ranch. Colt had asked her the night before what she required, and she had given him a list, and he had found most of it in the supply room and sent Dax for the rest. She had not expected that. She had expected to improvise. Instead, she had everything she needed. The boy's name was Thomas. He watched her with the alert quietness of a sick child who had learned that watching adults carefully gave you better information than asking them questions. I know it hurts, she told him. He considered this. When does it stop, he said. When your body figures out what's making it sick, she said. Right now it's working hard, so we give it what it needs to keep working. He thought about this. What does it need? Water from the North Spring, she said. Not the well. The spring north of the church. And sleep. And something bitter that I'm going to give you that you will not like. He made a face. That's fair, she said. She worked on him for an hour. She heard the crowd gathering outside. She thought, there it is. She thought you knew this was coming. She thought, finish what you're doing first. When she came out, there were perhaps 20 people on the street. Not a mob. Not yet. Something between a gathering and a confrontation, which was the most unstable kind of thing because it could go in either direction, depending on very small decisions made by very few people in a short window. Colt was standing at the fence. Dax was beside him. Neither of them was doing anything threatening, just standing, being present in the way that meant she is not alone. Flint sat between Colt and the gate. Marin came down the front path. She stopped in the middle of the street. She looked at the faces. She thought, you know some of these people. You treated their children. You sat in their houses at 2 in the morning and you held their babies. She thought, and then you watched them choose the easier story. She said, the water from your south well is contaminated. I have 4 documented samples and a notebook with 12 pages of observation from the night I was here. I also know there is a company operating in the hills north of this town that has been discharging waste into the creek that feeds your south well. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I told you this 6 days ago. A baby died. I understand why you needed someone to blame for that. I am asking you now to stop using the south well. Silence. Not hostile silence. The more complicated kind. The kind that happened when people were trying to reconfigure what they thought they understood. A man near the back said, "Who told you about any company?" "The evidence did," she said, "and there is more evidence coming." She thought Rafe. She thought, please let Rafe be fast. She heard a door open. Wendell Vane came out of his house across the street. He was not wearing his coat. He had come out quickly, which meant he had been watching from the window, which meant he had known they were here before he appeared. He walked across the street with the movement of a man deciding things with each step. He stopped 10 feet from her. He looked at her. He looked at Colt. He said, "Miss Lane, I have a writ." "You have a council writ," she said, "which requires a territorial magistrate's signature to become enforceable as an arrest warrant. Do you have that signature?" A pause. "I am in the process." "Then you don't have it," she said. Vane looked at the crowd, at the faces, measuring. She thought he is assessing what the crowd will do. She thought he does not know yet. She thought neither do I. And then she looked at Vane's house, the window on the ground floor. The curtain was open, which it had not been when she rode in, which meant someone had moved it recently, which meant someone was standing at that window. She looked. A child, small, a boy, 8 years old perhaps. He was standing at the glass with one hand pressed flat against the pane, not waving, just the hand against the glass, the way sick children put their hands on windows, reaching towards something, without the strength to reach all the way. She thought that child is sick. She thought no. She thought look again. She looked again. The color of the skin, the quality of the stillness, the way he held himself at the window as if standing required more than it should. She thought those are the symptoms. She thought that child has been drinking the south well water. She thought that is Vane's house. She said, "Mr. Vane." He looked at her. She said, "Your son is sick." Something happened in his face, not the careful political calculation of the past 10 minutes. Something underneath that, something he had not decided to show and could not keep from showing. It was there for 3 seconds and then it was gone, and the careful face came back. "My son is fine," he said. She looked at the window. The boy's hand was still on the glass. She said, "He is not fine. He is showing the same symptoms as the Neff baby and as Thomas Aldrich and as every other child who has been drinking from the south well." She looked at Vane. "You have known about the water for 14 months, and your son has been drinking it because he lives here, because there is no version of what you did that protected your own family." She stopped. "Let me go in." Vane was very still. She thought he's going to say no. She thought he's going to say no, and I am going to walk past him anyway, and he is going to have to physically stop me or not stop me, and the whole crowd is going to watch him choose. She took a step toward his house. He did not move. She took another step. He did not move. She walked past him. She opened the door to Wendell Vane's house. She went inside. Tobias Vane was 8 years old, and he had been sick for 6 days. His mother was dead. Vane had not written this information anywhere, but the house had the quality of a house without a woman in it for a long time. Clean but bare, functional but not warm. The kind of house where the work got done and the comfort did not. Tobias was in the front room by the fire, in a chair that was too big for him. He looked at her when she came in with the calm of a child who had been sick long enough that visitors were just another thing that happened. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said. "I'm Marin. I'm going to help." She set her satchel down. She checked him the way she had checked all the others. The same protocol. Start with what you can see. She thought 6 days. She thought this is not as far as the Neff baby. She thought there is time. She worked quickly, not frantically. Quickly is not the same as frantically. Frantically introduced errors. Quickly was just efficient. Tobias watched her with serious eyes. He said, "Are you the one they were all talking about outside?" "Probably," she said. "Papa was angry," he said. "This morning," she kept working. "Was he? He's been angry for days." Tobias shifted slightly. "He doesn't know I hear him. I hear him at night. He talks to himself." A pause. "He said something bad was happening and he couldn't stop it." She looked at him. "Something bad was happening," she said carefully. "Yes." "Did he make it happen?" She thought about 14 months of payments in a ledger, about a Southwell, about a baby named Neff, who was 18 months old and would not turn 2. She said he made some choices that made it harder to stop. Tobias absorbed this. "Is he in trouble?" he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to make me better?" "I'm going to do my best," she said, "which I have been told is considerable." He almost smiled. She was aware of the door opening behind her. She did not turn around. She said, "Mr. Vane, I need clean water from the North Spring, not the well, and a clean cloth. There should be one in the kitchen." Silence for a moment, then footsteps. He went to the kitchen. She heard him filling something. She heard him searching for the cloth. He came back and set both things beside her without a word. She kept working. He stood behind her. She was aware of him the way you were aware of weather, not actively attending to it, but knowing it was there. She said, "How long has he been showing symptoms?" 5 days, Vane said. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Silence. "Mr. Vane." "Because telling anyone meant explaining why," he said. His voice was different now, not the careful political voice, something rougher underneath it, something that had been under pressure for a long time and was finally showing its seams, and explaining why meant. He stopped. "Meant what it means," she said quietly. He said nothing. She worked for another hour. Tobias fell asleep somewhere in the middle of it, the deep sleep of a body that had been fighting and had been given some assistance and was grateful for the chance to rest. She stood up. She looked at the sleeping child. "She thought you are not out of the woods. She thought, but the window has not closed. She thought he will need 3 more days of clean water and the medicines she had brought and someone checking on him twice daily." She turned. Vane was sitting in the chair across the room. He had been sitting there the entire time. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down and was discovering that putting it down was not the simple relief he had imagined, because the weight was still there, only now it was outside him rather than inside, and that was in some ways worse, because now he had to look at it. She said, "He needs 3 more days of clean water and the following preparations. I'll write them down." She opened her notebook. "He will recover. He caught it earlier than the others." She wrote the instructions. She tore the page out. She set it on the table. She picked up her satchel. She said, "The ledger exists. Mr. Vane, my colleague has already left for Garner's Crossing. The U.S. Marshal's office will have it within 2 days. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "I am not asking you to explain yourself to me. I don't require it." She looked at Tobias. "I am telling you so that you can decide how you want to be in the room when they arrive." She went to the door. She stopped. She said, "He asked me if you made it happen. I told him you made some choices that made it harder to stop." She did not turn around. "You can tell him the rest when he's older. That's your decision." She walked out. The crowd was still there, smaller now. The thing that happened when time passed without an obvious crisis. Some people had gone back to their business. The ones who remained were the ones who were genuinely waiting to understand rather than the ones who had come hoping for something more dramatic. Colt was at the gate. He looked at her face. She said, "Tobias Vane is going to live." He looked at the house. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "And the rest of it." "The rest of it is coming," she said. He handed her something, coffee, from somewhere, in a cup she recognized as having come from the saddlebag, which meant he had brought it from the ranch and kept it warm against his coat the whole ride here, which meant he had been planning to be here long enough that coffee was a reasonable thing to bring. She drank it. She thought this man. Rafe arrived the following afternoon. She heard the horses before she saw them. More than two. She was in the Aldrich house for Thomas's second treatment, and she looked up at the window and saw the street from a different angle, and she saw Rafe riding in with two men she did not know in dark coats. She thought the marshals. She thought he made it in time. She did not run. She finished the treatment. She told Thomas's mother what to do for the next 2 days. She thanked her, which was its own complicated thing, because the woman had said nothing during this visit about what had happened 6 days ago, and Marin did not require her to say something, but the absence of it was present in the room the way absences often were. She went outside. Rafe was already at the center of the main street. The two deputy marshals were with him. One of them was carrying something. The ledger. Vane came out of his house when the marshals knocked. He opened the door and looked at them and looked at the ledger, and Marin watched his face do the thing that faces did. When they arrived at an end they had known was coming and had been moving toward for longer than they could remember. There were words exchanged, official words with the quality of a process that had been done before and would be done again. Marin did not hear all of them. She did not need to. She watched Vane look at the ledger. She watched him look at Rafe. She watched him look at her. And she watched him for the first time in any of their encounters look directly at her, without the careful political expression, without calculation, without the management of narrative. He looked at her the way a man looked at the thing he had tried to bury and had failed to bury and could not look away from. She held his gaze. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The marshals took him, not dramatically, with the professional quiet of people doing a job. Vane walked with them without resistance. He turned once at the end of the street and looked at his house, and Marin knew he was looking at the upstairs window where Tobias was sleeping. She could not tell at this distance what was in his face for that moment. She looked away. The town of Redfall had a complicated afternoon, the kind that happened when the story you had been telling yourself turned out to be wrong and you had to find somewhere to put the pieces. Some people came to her, not many, but some. A woman who had been at the meeting in Clara Neff's house, a man who had been one of the three who came with Vane that morning. The woman said, "We didn't know." Marin said, "I know." The woman said, "We should have." Marin said, "Yes," not unkindly, just clearly. "You should have, but we're here now." The man said nothing. He stood near the general store and looked at her from that distance, and eventually he went back inside. She did not know what that meant, and she did not pursue it. The pastor found her near the end of the afternoon. He was the thin man with the careful voice. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been doing rapid internal accounting and had arrived at numbers he did not like. He said, "I may have contributed to what happened to you." She said, "You may have." He said, "I am sorry." She looked at him. She thought he means it. She thought sorry does not unmake anything. She thought, but it is not nothing. She said, "Tell your congregation to use the North Spring until the water is tested and cleared. That's what you can do right now." He nodded. She walked on. Mrs. Harker found her as the light was dying. The boarding house owner, the woman who had taken her 60 cents and shown her the kitchen door and said nothing while it all happened. She stood on the boardwalk in front of her house with her arms crossed. She said, "Your room is still made up." Marin stopped. She said, "Thank you." She said, "I'm not staying in Redfall." Mrs. Harker looked at her. She said, "I know." A pause. "The offer stands if you change your mind." Marin said, "I won't change my mind." She kept walking. She found Colt at the end of the street. He was holding the horses. Dax was beside him, eating something from his coat pocket, with the contentment of a man who had decided to wait as long as necessary and had prepared for it. Flint was sitting beside Colt. She stopped in front of them. Colt said, "The marshals want your samples for the formal case." "They can have them." She had already thought about this. "I have the notebook. That's the record. The bottles are just confirmation." He nodded. She looked at the street behind her, at the town of Redfall with its low buildings and its crooked weather vane and its Southwell and its damaged history. She thought you could stay here. She thought they have offered you a room. She thought they owe you. She thought owing is not the same as belonging. She looked at Colt. She said, 8 miles north." He said, 8 miles north." She said, "I'd like to go home," which was the first time she had used that word, for anything. He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Flint." The dog stood up. They rode north. Spring came to the valley the way springs came in Montana, without apology, without preparation. One week the world was still white, and the next the mud was showing through, and the next thing you knew, there were birds in the timber that had not been there the week before, and the light lasted an hour longer than you expected it to. Marin noticed the exact day the creek ran clear, because she checked it. She had been checking it since February, when the U.S. Marshals closed the Gaston mining operation and the discharge stopped and the natural flow of the water began its slow work of clearing itself. There was a point upstream she had marked with a stone. She went there twice a week. The day she found it clear, she stood in the water with her boots getting wet and felt something move through her that did not have a name she could find exactly. Not triumph, not vindication, something quieter than those words. The satisfaction of a hypothesis that had turned out to be correct and had cost a great deal in the proving. She wrote in her notebook, March 14th, "Creek running clear at test point. Recommend Redfall return to Southwell access beginning April when flow stabilizes." She looked at what she had written. She thought you should tell someone. She thought Colt will be at the North Pasture. She went to find him. The house went up in May, not the main house. The small building beside it, which had been a discussion between her and Colt and Rafe and Dax over 4 separate evenings at the kitchen table, each one arriving at slightly different dimensions before landing on something they all agreed on. One large room for treatment, one small room for storage, a door wide enough to bring a stretcher through, a window on the east side because morning light was the most useful for examining people. Dax said he could build it. Rafe said he could build it faster. They had a brief but spirited discussion about this, while Colt listened and Marin wrote the dimensions in her notebook, and Flint watched from the doorway with the weary patience of a dog who had seen this kind of conversation before and knew how it ended. They built it together. It took 11 days. On the 12th day, Marin put her satchel on the shelf and her bottles in a row beside it and her notebook on the table and stood in the middle of the room. She thought this is real. She thought this is an actual thing that exists. She thought about all the rooms that had not been hers, the boarding rooms, the corners, the spare space people had extended when they needed her and withdrawn when they did not. She thought about how she had carried her whole life in one satchel because anything she could not carry had always eventually ended up somewhere. She could not reach it. She thought, this is mine. She thought not just the building. She walked back to the main house. Colt was on the porch. He had been on the porch more often lately. She had noticed this, like a man who had found a reason to be at the edge of the house where he could see both the road and the interior simultaneously. She sat on the step below him. She said, "I want to talk about the advertisement." He said, "All right." She said, "The part about willing to stay." He said, "What about it?" She said, "I am willing to stay." She looked at the mountains. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because it's practical, not because you helped me when I was in the trees." She stopped. "Because this is what I want. Because you asked me something on the porch about being braver than I believe myself to be, and I have been thinking about it since February, and I think you were right." She paused. "And because you stood at that door in the cold last December and did not move." She heard him exhale. He said, "You came back." She said, "I came back." He said, "Then I'd like to ask you something." She waited. He said, "I'd like to ask it properly, if you'll let me." She thought he is a man who put his coat on a woman he had never met in the dark, in the trees because the situation required it, and he assessed the situation and acted. She thought he is a man who stood at a door for 1 second, weighing everything and then stepped forward. She thought he is a man who makes coffee and keeps it warm inside his coat for an hour because he planned to be somewhere long enough that it was worth bringing. She said, "Ask properly." He said, "Marin Lane, I would like you to stay here not as a guest and not as someone I owe a debt to. I would like you to stay as mine, and I would like to be yours." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what I'm asking. I know it's not a small thing. I know you have spent your whole life being the person who knows things and gets treated worse for knowing them." He looked at the mountains. "I want to be the person who knows what you know and is grateful for it." He paused. "Will you marry me?" She thought yes. She thought say it. She said yes. He did not make a production of it. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the step. She turned her hand and held his. They married on a Thursday in June, not in the church in Redfall, in the clearing behind the ranch where the pine trees made a natural wall on 3 sides and the 4th side open to the mountains. Dax cried. He had announced in advance that he was going to cry, and he was a man who followed through on his announcements regardless of the circumstances. Rafe did not cry. He stood with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who was not going to cry and was winning so far, but it was closer than he would admit to anyone. The pastor from Redfall came because she had told him he could, because forgiveness was not a single decision but a series of small ones, and she had decided to keep making the small ones towards something rather than away from it. Clara Neff came. She stood at the edge of the clearing, and when Marin looked at her during the ceremony, Clara Neff gave her a nod that contained more words than a nod usually contained. Marin nodded back. That was the whole conversation. That was the right size for it. Flint wore a piece of ribbon that Dax had tied to his collar, which Flint endured with the dignity of a dog doing something for the humans because the humans needed it, and it cost him very little. After the ceremony in the clearing with the pine trees and the mountains and the June sky doing its best with the light, Marin stood with Colt's hand in hers and looked north. She thought about the creek running clear. She thought about the notebook with its 12 pages and its 4 labeled bottles. She thought about a baby who had died in December. She thought that is still true. She thought it is still true and it cannot be untrue. She thought, and so you do the work. That is the answer. Not triumph, not vindication, just the work continued from here. She thought about Lily. She thought I went back, Lily. She thought I went back. Later, when the clearing had emptied and the pine trees were dark, and the mountains were doing the thing they did at night, which was being very large and very patient about the whole business of things. She sat on the porch of the ranch house with Colt beside her and Flint across the threshold and looked at the small building with the east-facing window, the healing house, hers. She thought, this is the thing you build after the cold, after the trees, after the bottles and the samples and the crowd in the street and the man with his legal papers and the boy with his hand pressed flat against the glass. You build something. You build something real and not easy and yours, and you stay in it.